The pyramids were built to touch the heavens, but inside Egypt's temples, rituals dragged innocents straight into hell. Behind the golden masks and sacred hymns lay ceremonies of blood, sex, and corruption, acts so scandalous that even ancient historians hesitated to write them down. You awaken to the sound of stone grinding against stone, the deep scrape echoing through limestone corridors that have silenced voices for 3 millennia. Rising, your palms meet cold sandstone, and in that instant you know where you stand, buried within the tomb of a pharaoh in the Valley of the Kings. Hieroglyphs shimmer in your wavering torchlight, the carved symbols seeming almost alive as shadows play across them. The air is heavy with the scent of myrrh, mingled with something far older, organic and unsettling, that twists in your stomach. As your eyes grow accustomed to the dark, the walls reveal their true face. Every surface is covered with scenes too intimate, too strange, to resemble the neat, innocent lessons once taught in classrooms. These are not the polished fragments of Egyptian love songs you may have read in books. Here, on stone meant to endure eternity, are depictions of sacred prostitution, ritual initiations, and acts so entangled with divine belief that they shaped Egypt's empire for over 2,000 years. Before we continue deeper into these forgotten chambers, if you find yourself compelled by history's hidden truths, consider leaving a mark of support, subscribe, share your thoughts, and let me know from which corner of the world you are listening. I find it extraordinary that across centuries and continents, curiosity binds us together in this pursuit of the past. Now, step further with me into this tomb, for what you are about to uncover will change forever how you see one of the world's most fascinating civilizations. It is 1323 BC. In the temple at Karnak, a girl of 14 trembles in the half-light. Enkisanamon, daughter of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten and widow of the boy king Tutankhamun, stands in a linen robe so sheer it might as well be mist. Gold clasps at her neck, wrists, and ankles glint with each shiver, not from cold, but from dread of what comes next. From the shadows steps the high priest of Ammonius, his shaved head glistening with sacred oils, his gaze carrying a hunger that has nothing to do with worship. In moments, Enkisanamon must take part in the Opet festival's most feared rite, the divine marriage. She is to lie with Ammonius Ra himself, or rather with the priest, serving as the god's living vessel. This was no symbol, no harmless pageant. This was how Egypt's priests sanctified their power, by claiming the bodies of royal women, century after century, as if heaven itself had decreed it. And the practice was not confined to queens. Papyrus records from Deir el-Medina, uncovered in 1922 by the French archaeologist Bernard Bruyère, reveal that hundreds of girls were once bound to this fate. They bore the title, God's wives, a phrase that sounds exalted, yet masked what was, in truth, ritualized sexual slavery. Chosen for their beauty and their youth, some only 12 or 13, they were dedicated to serve the gods as living offerings in temple after temple. The process of selection was merciless. Priests examined girls naked, judging them with cold precision. A blemish, a scar, even a single tooth out of place could mark one unworthy. Ironically, such flaws may have been blessings, sparing a child from years of ceremonial abuse paraded as divine duty. Research by Dr. Joyce Tildesley of Manchester University adds chilling weight to these accounts. Her studies of Theban temple archives from around 1550 BC describe the daily lives of these wives. They were cloistered within temple walls, their youth consumed in rituals that blurred the line between faith and violation, rituals written into the very foundations of Egyptian religion. Within the temple walls, the wives of the gods lived cloistered lives. Their clothing marked them apart from ordinary women, their fate sealed by ritual. They could not marry, nor bear children outside their divine obligations. When pregnancies occurred, the infants were often returned to the temples themselves, creating an endless cycle of generational bondage where daughters followed mothers into sacred servitude. What shocked outsiders most was not simply the frequency of these unions, but their public nature. During great festivals, the Opet in Thebes, the rites of Min at Coptos, the said jubilees, thousands gathered to watch pharaohs or high priests enact sacred marriages with temple women. These were not hidden rites whispered in secret chambers, they were spectacles performed under the sun, before crowds who believed they were witnessing the gods themselves ensuring the Nile's flooding, the abundance of harvests, and the kingdom's very survival. Herodotus, traveling through Egypt around 450 BC, recorded his astonishment. He described noble maidens, chosen for beauty and rank, being prepared for unions with gods appearing in human form. Their faces betrayed distress, though Egyptian onlookers interpreted this as ecstasy granted by divine presence. Archaeology has confirmed what the Greek historian suggested. Carvings in the Temple of Min at Coptos show the god, unmistakably depicted with erect phallus, joined with women whose faces are turned aside. In Egyptian art, such averted faces were rare, and scholars argue they represent reluctance, even shame. Around these central figures dance musicians, performers, and offerings, as if a festival had been woven around what was, in truth, ritualized violation. The toll was not only physical, but deeply psychological. Fragments of the Edwin Smith surgical papyrus, dating to around 1600 BC, include treatments that modern eyes recognize as responses to trauma: women unable to sleep, refusing food, prone to sudden tears or fearful withdrawal. The remedies prescribed herbs, oils, and prayers for women who had served the gods, revealing that Egyptians themselves knew of the cost, even if they could not name it. Even marriage contracts reflected this acceptance. From the New Kingdom period, between 1550 and 1070 BC, agreements sometimes freed husbands from obligations if wives were summoned to temple service. Fathers even calculated dowries according to whether daughters had already served in sacred roles, with such women commanding a lesser bride price despite their supposed divine blessing. And Egypt's darker secrets did not end with life. In 945 BC, Wahabradra's embalming chamber stank of natron and decay. A noblewoman lay before him, dead in childbirth. Her grieving family believed she was entering eternity intact, but embalming carried hidden rites darker than any festival. Recent CT scans of mummies in Cairo's Egyptian Museum, conducted by Dr. Zahi Hawass and his team in 2005, revealed post-mortem trauma in nearly a quarter of female mummies, evidence of sexual assault after death, committed before final wrapping. Herodotus himself hinted at this practice in his histories around 440 BC. He noted that families of noble or beautiful women often withheld the bodies for several days, fearing what embalmers might do before the corpses were delivered. Now, modern science has given weight to whispers that once seemed too grotesque to believe. Herodotus hinted at it long ago. He cryptically noted that one embalmer had been caught defiling a newly deceased woman and was executed, not for the violation itself, but for the disgrace of being discovered. Excavations at Deir el-Bahri in 1881 revealed papyrus fragments that shed new light on these practices. Written in hieratic script, they appear to be training manuals for embalmers. Buried among instructions for purification rites are chilling directives about opening the sacred passages of female corpses. Early scholars dismissed this as routine preparation for burial. Yet the anatomical precision and ritual context suggest something darker, an institutionalized pattern of abuse cloaked in the language of sanctity. The 70-day mummification process left bodies vulnerable. Once the families departed, corpses remained in the workshops, guarded only by silence and tradition. Records from Tanis, dated around 1000 BC, describe embalmers working night shifts alone, precisely when Egyptians believed the dead were most spiritually exposed. In these midnight hours, opportunities for desecration abounded. Evidence comes not only from CT scans of modern times but also from ancient prosecutions. The Harris Papyrus, preserved in the British Museum, contains legal decrees from 156 BC describing embalmers tried for defiling the sacred vessels. Modern Egyptologists believe this phrase veiled accusations of necrophilia. The punishment was merciless: death by execution, the stripping of family property, and exile of their kin. Disturbingly, some embalmers may have believed such acts possessed mystical purpose. They thought intimacy with the dead transferred fragments of life force, granting virility or prolonging existence. Amulets found in embalming houses depict sexual contact with mummies, and incantations preserved in papyri read like magical formulas meant to accompany such desecration. Forensic evidence offers the most shocking confirmations. The mummy of Princess Meketaten, daughter of Queen Nefertiti, who died around 1330 BC at just 13, shows deliberate unwrapping and rewrapping at her pelvic region. Resin residue between wrappings proves the body was accessed multiple times, well beyond what any legitimate embalming required. Later Christian voices condemned what pagans once hid. Bishop Theophilus of Alexandria, writing in 385 AD, spoke bitterly of Egyptian embalmers who violated the corpses of noble women under the guise of ritual. By his time the scandal was so entrenched that many Christian families refused Egyptian mummification altogether. And the psychological toll was not limited to victims. Records from Memphis show embalmers died by suicide at rates far higher than other professions, often drowning themselves in the Nile, a death believed to deny the soul passage into eternity. Scholars suggest guilt drove these men to self-destruction, trapped between shame and the impossibility of confession. Perhaps most terrifying are signs that some women were killed specifically to supply fresh bodies. A young woman's mummy at Saqqara revealed poisoning with oleander, a fast-acting toxin that left her body intact for preservation. Inside her wrappings were papyrus prayers begging Osiris for forgiveness, grim proof that the embalmers knew she had been sacrificed for their own violation. Yet Egypt's darkest secrets extended even into the royal palaces. In 1358 BC, Princess Sitamon pressed her forehead against the limestone of her chamber at Malkata, listening to the heavy tread of her father, Pharaoh Amenhotep III. At 23 she was already both daughter and wife to the same man, and she had borne him at least one child, a daughter who played outside, unaware her grandfather was also her father. Royal incest in Egypt was not aberration but system. Genetic studies published in 2010 by Dr. Karsten Pusch on royal mummies in Cairo revealed the cost of such lineage. Tutankhamun himself, born of a brother-sister union, carried spina bifida, clubfoot, and likely epilepsy, all products of centuries of inbreeding. Marriage contracts from the 18th dynasty, preserved today in the Metropolitan Museum, detail with chilling precision categories of sisters of the body, full sisters, and sisters of the house, half-sisters, assigning different inheritance rights to the children of each. Pharaohs justified it as divine imitation of Osiris and Isis. In truth, it locked power inside the family at a terrible human cost. But the incest of Egypt's royals went further still. Pharaoh Amenhotep II married 3 of his own daughters. At Amarna, palace records confirm that Akhenaten carried on relationships with at least 6 of his daughters simultaneously. One limestone relief shows him kissing one girl while another sits openly on his lap, the hieroglyphic captions identifying both as daughters of his body and wives of his bed. The toll this culture exacted on royal women is etched into their bones. Queen Ankhesenamun, daughter and wife of Akhenaten, later consort of Tutankhamun, lived to just 27. Her remains, analyzed in 2010, show signs of chronic depression, vitamin D deficiency from years of seclusion, stress fractures consistent with repeated physical abuse, and evidence of multiple pregnancies that ended in miscarriage or infant death. Medical papyri from the Edwin Smith collection preserve remedies for twisted limbs in children. Splints, herbal poultices, and exercises speak to a grim reality. Egyptian doctors treated birth defects regularly, defects bred from centuries of incest. One disturbing entry even describes surgery for infants born with sealed passages, likely genital malformations from inbreeding. The most damning evidence came from Deir el-Bahri in 1881. 11 royal mummies were unearthed. DNA analysis revealed that 9 were products of incest. 7 showed severe genetic disorders. In Tutankhamun's tomb, 2 infant girls, his daughters by his half-sister Ankhesenamun, were discovered. Both had fatal neural tube defects, their short lives extinguished before they began. Diplomatic correspondence preserved in the Amarna letters reveals foreign horror at these practices. The king of Mitanni wrote to Amenhotep III, "Your daughters are wives, and your wives are daughters." My scribes cannot write the marriage contracts clearly, for the relations are too confused. Royal daughters sometimes sought desperate escape. A papyrus from 1345 BC tells of Princess Baktaten begging the Hittite king for asylum, "My father would make me his wife, as he did my sisters. I would rather die in a foreign land than submit to this defilement of nature's law." Many such runaways were hunted down and dragged back to Egypt by royal soldiers. This culture warped family itself. Children grew up never knowing if their mothers were sisters, aunts, or both. Palace records from Ramesses II describe elaborate systems of titles and etiquette designed to navigate relationships that defied natural order. Religion provided the excuse. Pharaohs likened themselves to Osiris and Isis, brother and sister married as gods. Temple reliefs show couples offering to the divine while inscriptions praise their sibling unions as blessings. But private letters reveal revulsion. A nobleman wrote to his son, "The royal house breeds like beasts in their dens, sister with brother, father with daughter. This is why their children are twisted and die young." By the dynasty's close, genetic decay was catastrophic. Over 60% of royal infants perished at birth. Survivors lived brief, painful lives marked by deformity and disability. Tutankhamun himself, crippled by congenital defects, could barely stand without help. His reign ended in agony at 19, a boy king broken by the sins of his bloodline. And still, the rituals of defilement continued. In the Temple of Hathor at Dendra, oil lamps cast trembling light across stone walls as 12-year-old Nefertari gripped the altar's edge, her knuckles white. She was the next sacrifice to one of Egypt's most brutal rites, ritualized defloration by priests, the opening of the sacred gateway for the gods. The ritual was no secret. It unfolded before rows of temple dignitaries, watched by priests, scribes, and attendants who carefully recorded every detail on stone and papyrus. To the surrounding community, what we would call a violation was instead proclaimed a divine blessing, a sacred duty performed for the gods themselves. Archaeological evidence confirms how widespread the practice truly was. Excavations at the Temple of Mut in Karnak uncovered stone tablets cataloging hundreds of such ceremonies between 1400 and 1200 BC. The records are chilling in their precision. They include the names of each girl, her exact age, and the specific priest assigned to her ritual. The youngest inscribed was no more than 9 years old. The oldest only 16. Most fell in that fragile space between 12 and 14, children by any modern measure, yet in Egypt already considered vessels of divine power. The youngest girl recorded was 9 years old, the oldest was 16, most were between 12 and 14, barely past puberty in a society where childhood ended early and brutally. The process began with elaborate purification rituals that lasted 3 days. Girls selected for defloration were bathed in sacred pools, anointed with oils mixed with frankincense and myrrh, and fed special foods believed to enhance their spiritual receptivity. During this period of preparation, silence was demanded. The chosen girls were forbidden to speak with anyone except the priestesses assigned to them. These women, guardians of the temple, drilled into the young initiates their so-called divine duties and warned them that even a flicker of fear or resistance would provoke the wrath of the gods. Papyrus fragments from the Ramesseum provide the theological scaffolding for such practices. Egyptian priests taught that a maiden's untouched body contained a unique spiritual force. Only through ritual defloration, carried out by men purified through sacred rites, could this hidden power be released and offered to the gods. To the priesthood, the act was framed as sacrifice. The girl's pain, her blood, her very body were offerings to the deities, exchanged for blessings upon the land, floodwaters for the Nile, rich harvests for the fields, victories for the crown. Texts uncovered at Edfu describe these rites with chilling precision. Everything followed protocol. The girl was led before the assembled witnesses clothed in a translucent linen gown that revealed more than it concealed, her body glittering with gold jewelry marking her as a sacred gift. The temple chamber thickened with incense while musicians played hymns meant to summon the fertility gods. All eyes fixed upon the trembling figure, prepared to be consumed by a ritual her society proclaimed as holy. Incense thickened the chamber, curling toward the painted ceilings, while temple musicians played hymns meant to summon the fertility gods. At the center of the ritual, a high priest, standing as the vessel of divinity, would violate the chosen girl, using implements preserved as sacred relics, knives, stone phalluses, or carved wooden objects believed to channel divine power. Modern scholarship has revealed chilling confirmation of these rites. Dr. Joanne Fletcher's study of remains from Abydos uncovered skeletal evidence of pelvic trauma in young females, injuries consistent with violent assault. Many showed signs of infection, and some bore proof of deaths caused by internal injuries. Carbon dating traced these remains across 5 centuries of Egyptian dominance, indicating that such rituals were not rare anomalies, but entrenched traditions. The aftermath was rationalized under religious doctrine. Girls who emerged broken, mute, withdrawn, or prone to sudden outbursts, were not treated as victims but proclaimed, touched by the divine. Many were forced into lifelong temple service, their trauma sanctified as holy possession. Medical papyri of the time speak of remedies for divine madness, herbal mixtures to calm sleeplessness, loss of appetite, and uncontrollable weeping, symptoms we now recognize as markers of deep psychological trauma. Some temples built entire hierarchies around these defloration rites. Administrative records preserved in the Chester Beatty Papyrus 6 describe priests who bore the title opener of the sacred gateway. The position carried privileges, larger rations, superior housing, and first choice of which girls they would claim. Such roles became hereditary, passed from father to son, embedding generational dynasties of ritualized abusers. Traveling scribes recorded regional variations. In Lower Egypt, these ceremonies coincided with the Nile's annual flood, the girl's blood symbolically linked to the river's waters of life. In Upper Egypt, the rites were tied to harvest festivals, their violation seen as a guarantee of fertile crops and livestock. The most grotesque festivals took place at the Temple of Min at Coptos, where mass deflorations were performed before cheering crowds. The Greek historian Strabo, visiting in 25 BC, described his horror at seeing maidens, little more than children, violated in public by priests while the crowd threw flowers in celebration. Several girls died on the altar from blood loss or shock, yet their deaths were interpreted as divine favor. Economic records show families were compensated for their daughters' sacrifice with grain, livestock, or small parcels of land, but only after the ceremonies were complete. Withdrawal was impossible. Families who attempted to protect their daughters risked losing their property, facing exile, or being condemned to forced labor. And yet, fragments of hidden resistance survive. Some private texts speak of women who conspired to shield the young, moving them between villages or disguising them to evade temple selection. Their efforts were dangerous, their successes rare, but they reveal that even in a society where the system appeared all-powerful, sparks of defiance still glimmered against the darkness. Fragments of papyri from private archives hint at secret resistance. Some texts employed coded warnings for families, signaling when temple scouts were hunting for new candidates. One document from 1250 BC reads, "When the lotus seekers come to your door, remember that the river runs deep but also runs away." Scholars believe this was a veiled reference to escape routes used by parents desperate to save their daughters from being taken. Centuries later, in 570 BC, twilight fell over the temple of Batet at Bubastis. Hundreds of oil lamps flared to life, their glow illuminating walls carved with cats, dancers, and scenes of ritual intimacy. The Ptolemaic festival of Batet was beginning, a 3-day celebration in which ordinary women were transformed into sacred prostitutes, offering their bodies to strangers in honor of the goddess. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing around 450 BC, described what he personally witnessed. Once a year, the women gather at the temple of Bubastis. For 3 days they lie with any man who brings the proper payment. No woman may refuse. The money, he wrote, went to the temple, but the act itself was called a sacred duty. Excavations at Bubastis in the late 19th century uncovered physical evidence confirming Herodotus' account. Archaeologist Edouard Neville unearthed thousands of pottery tokens beneath the temple floors, each bearing the image of Batet on one side and explicit sexual imagery on the other. These served as receipts for temple prostitution. The sheer quantity, over 12,000 recovered, reveals the staggering scale of these festivals. But sacred prostitution in Egypt extended far beyond annual rites. Records from Philae document a permanent class of women known as God's wives of Ammonius, dedicated to serving male visitors year-round. Letters preserved on papyrus from Teptunes show the toll on these women. One prostitute wrote to her sister around 200 BC, "I have served 37 men this month, and still the goddess demands more. My body aches, but worse is my heart, which grows hard like stone." The profits were immense. Temple ledgers from Crocodilopolis show revenues from prostitution surpassing offerings of grain, livestock, and metals during peak seasons. Economic necessity drove recruitment, often by deception. Poor families were promised food and protection if they surrendered their daughters. Once within the walls, escape was nearly impossible. Legal documents from Oxyrhynchus record families' futile attempts to reclaim their children, denied on the grounds of sacred vows. Medical papyri detail the grim consequences. Remedies for temple sickness, what we now recognize as sexually transmitted diseases, appear alongside recipes for abortifacients and surgical procedures to repair damage from violent encounters. Girls were recruited younger during famines, some as young as 10. The Wilbur Papyrus of 141 BC lists dozens of sacred prostitutes under 14, described as not yet women, but serving as vessels of the goddess. Regional practices varied. In Memphis, prostitution took place in hidden underground chambers, complete with air shafts and soundproofing. At Elephantine, it occurred openly in temple gardens. Indoctrination reinforced obedience. Girls were taught from childhood that resistance was sin, and revulsion proof of spiritual failure. Graffiti at Esna preserves their voices. One woman carved, "Isis knows the pain in my heart, but I cannot speak it. May other daughters be spared this blessing." Another wrote simply, "I have forgotten my name, but the goddess remembers my body." Even death did not end exploitation. In 1279 BC, the embalmer Yusa Hatmos prepared the mummy of a noblewoman, Merak Pite, beside the Valley of the Kings. According to religious texts, she would need her sexual organs intact for eternity, for in the afterlife she was expected to serve male spirits and even the pharaoh himself. The pyramid texts, dating to 2400 BC, describe this fate explicitly, female souls existing as companions of pleasure to the dead. Thus the cycle endured, from childhood to death, and beyond. The same civilization that built soaring pyramids and inscribed wisdom in stone also sanctified some of the darkest practices known to history. The testimonies carved in temple walls, the scars on bones, the silent cries of women across the centuries, all speak to the human cost hidden beneath Egypt's golden splendor. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next videos.